this webinar is being sponsored by Mobile Coach. A Mobile Coach is a chatbot for learning platform, and we're delighted to have you join us. So with that, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce our panelists. We'll kind of run this pretty quickly, but I do want to make sure that you get to see our panelists' smiling faces and hear a little bit about them. So let's see if I can multitask here. I'm going to stop my screen share, and I'm going to start with, let's see. Okay, so Jamie. We'll start with Jamie. So Jamie serves on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team at Disney General Entertainment Content. Jamie works in the television segment supporting ABC Entertainment, Hulu Originals, Disney branded TV, and National Geographic. In her role, Jamie advocates for authentic representation in content, facilitates DEI learning workshops, organizes events to hire and develop underrepresented talent, and helps foster a culture of belonging for all employees. And prior to this role, she spent 2 years on Disney's corporate learning and organizational development team, and she received her MA in psychology and BA in cultural and social psychology from Stanford University. Hi, Jamie, how are you today?
Hi, everyone. Good to be here. I'm doing well. Nice to meet everyone.
Nice to meet you too. And before we dive into the actual panel topic, since I'm introducing everybody, can you just quickly tell us what types of training topics you work on, just to give some people some context?
Totally. So as you mentioned, I'm on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team, and I support the television side of the business. So it's really just around all diversity and inclusion topics related to trying to help us create really inclusive shows and programming, as well as a really inclusive culture. So it can be things like how to lead inclusively, responsible allyship, everyday inclusion for our cast and crews, as well as some really specific programming around specific dimensions of identity, so we can create authentic and representative storylines for people to relate to.
That's really, really great. And the other day, Jamie and I were talking, and you mentioned something I thought was really interesting, that when people are writing storylines or characters, that it's important to help them get it right in terms of allyship and representing different segments correctly. I thought that was really, really great.
Thanks. I love it. It's an awesome role.
All right, well, thank you for joining us today, Jamie. And next, I'd like to introduce Felicia White. Felicia is the Vice President of Global Operations Training and Development for Church's Chicken and has been with the organization for 13 years. Felicia is responsible for managing global operations and leadership training for the Church's Chicken, Texas Chicken, and Church's Texas Chicken brands. In addition to managing training, Felicia is a member of the Leadership Committee for Church's Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion Council, and leads the Council's Church's Women's Forum and Church's LGBTQ+ employee resource groups. She holds an associate's degree in culinary arts, a bachelor's degree in hospitality administration, and master's degree in business administration, and is currently enrolled in Northwestern State University's Doctor of Education in Adult Learning and Development program. It's very impressive. Thanks for joining us, Felicia. How are you today?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great.
We were joking with Felicia that she has the most distinct background of our Zoom backgrounds today.
Awesome. Just throwing a little plug out there for the brand.
That's awesome. Thanks for joining us. Next, I'd like to introduce Megan Torrance. Megan is CEO and founder of Torrance Learning, which helps organizations connect learning strategy to design, development, data, and ultimately performance. Megan has over 25 years of experience in learning design, deployment, and consulting. Megan and the Torrance Learning team are passionate about sharing what works in learning, offering professional development programs in instructional design, learning technologies, racial equity, and agile methods. A graduate of Cornell University with a degree in communication and an MBA, and an eCornell facilitator in the Women's Executive Leadership Curriculum, Megan lives and works near Ann Arbor, Michigan. Hi, Megan.
Hey, Vince, how you doing?
Doing great. Tell us about working near Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Nobody knows the little teeny tiny town that our office is actually in. So we're in the within the 20-mile circle around Ann Arbor.
Great. All right. Awesome. Thank you. And last but not least, Mark Fritz. So Mark focuses on helping employees work together better to increase engagement and accelerate knowledge sharing. Mark began his career as an educator, expanding into e-learning design at companies such as SmartForce, KnowledgeNet, and Pearson Digital Learning, and the Learning Guild. As an organizational development leader, he worked to place social at the center of learning at companies such as Aspen Dental Management and Systems Made Simple. He is the co-author of Social by Design. By the way, a little plug for his book. I got it a couple weeks ago and it's wonderful. Social by Design, How to Create and Scale a Collaborative Company. And his work has been featured in the books Revolutionize Learning and Development, Performance and Innovation Strategy for the Information Age, and the Social Learning Handbook. Mark's consultancy, SXD Solutions, focuses on helping organizations stay small to grow successfully by guiding them through technology and systems change to create sustainable organization-wide connection and collaboration. Did I get that right, Mark?
I'm going to go back like three things. No, you did great, Vince. That was fabulous.
Well, thank you, Mark, for joining us.
Happy to be here.
And I asked Jamie, but failed to ask Felicia. Let me go back to you, Felicia. Can you tell us what some of the training topics are in your organization?
A majority of what we cover is operations and leadership related. So all of the how-tos within the restaurant itself, as well as for franchisees or above restaurant leaders, how to run their markets, grow their business, et cetera. And then on the leadership side, we offer a lot of training around just professional development topics and skills. And some of it is done through in-person learning or a combination of right now, a lot more virtual versus in-person, as well as through our learning management system.
That's wonderful. Mm-hmm. And Megan and Mark, for you, Megan, I think I read a little bit about the type of topics that you work on. But anything to add in terms of training topics?
I think one of the things I love about my job and the way it's set up is that I get to see a lot of a whole bunch of different things, right? So from sales training to soft skills and coaching to actually Felicia, one of the early e-learning courses I made was for a food ingredients manufacturer on the multiple coding systems that are involved in making great fried chicken. So I get to learn all sorts of really random stuff.
Well, now I'm hungry for fried chicken. All right. Okay. And Mark, how about you? Any specific training topics that you specialize in or want to address?
It's more of my work has always been on the peripheral of helping in the areas of conversation and reflection around learning. So it really helps to see how the impact of the organization the organization has on training when you build that connection between people and the knowledge is shared. The training becomes much more focused.
That's great. Thank you. So we're going to dive in, but before we do, as the panelists and I were preparing, we thought it would be nice to just learn a little bit more about who's attending, because we could talk for a long time about this topic, but we want to make sure that our focus is catering to why you've registered to attend today's webinar. And so we just launched a quick 2-question poll. If you could just take a minute and respond to that, will help us understand who's here and what you're looking for. If you do select other, just mention in the chat so we can get a sense of your job function and then what you are looking to learn. And I'd like to thank our producer, Corey, for putting this together. And we'll just let people give you a few seconds to answer this poll. And then once we end it, I think I'll be able to share it with everybody. All right, we're up to 60% voted. So just give you about another 10 seconds to get people to finish the poll. Hopefully it doesn't require too much thought. And thanks for those of you that are putting in the chat your other. That's really helpful. All right, I think that's it. I'm going to end the poll. and then share the results. And I think that means everyone can see the results, yes? So we have 14% instructional designers, 25% learning consultants, 7% managers, we have 21% director, CLO, and then almost 30% of other. So we should have expanded our choices there. And then for question number 2, what you're looking to learn. See, 71%, what are engagement best practices? Okay, so let's focus on actual practical suggestions today. And then 50%, how to integrate learning into the flow of work. Great, this is really helpful. Thanks everybody for participating in the poll. All right, let's dive into our panel. So I think I'm going to start with Jamie. I've got a question for you. Can you tell us a little bit about who your target learner audience is there at Disney? Who are they? And tell us, what do you do to engage them?
Sure. So as I mentioned, I work in the television space at Disney, and we have quite a few different populations of learners there. We have the creative population, who are people like our writers, our artists, our producers, people in casting and development, everyone who touches the creative of a show. And then we have our corporate population, which are the business functions that support people like legal, marketing, finance, scheduling and programming, consumer insights. Those are people kind of mostly sitting in an office supporting the back end functions of the show. And then we have the actual productions themselves, which are the cast and the crew of the different shows. So all of those audiences are a little bit different, as well as I also like to do learning experiences for people who are just trying to make it into television for the first time. Those include college students, underrepresented people from nonprofits. I like to design experiences to get them interested in a career in television. So all of those audiences are a little different. And I think when it comes to engagement, it's just all about flexibility and trying to make it meaningful for that person, right? So we always start with a pre-survey, try to understand what they want to get out of the session. I really like to design discussion-based learning experiences. I don't like to call them trainings. I like to just call them sessions or learning experiences together where they can learn from each other. But it's really about being flexible to the audience. With students and people who you're just trying to get interested in TV, I try to make it really engaging by having them walk through a set, talk to different posts about the job they do, get to see something kind of live to get them interested and excited. But for the more corporate population, sometimes it's more lecture based. And for cast and crew, I never bring a PowerPoint there. It's all going to be discussion. What kind of show environment do we want to create together? So I just try to be flexible and try to make it really meaningful for whoever I'm working with.
Yeah, that's to me, I guess, as someone not in television, it seems like it's so glamorous and interesting. Like who wouldn't want to be interested in working on a television set? But then as I think about it, I'm sure there are a lot of challenges that people have to navigate through. So thanks, Jamie. Felicia, I'm going to ask you now the same question, because I think your learner demographic could be different than Jamie's. Can you tell us about your audience? Who are they, and what kind of things do you do to sort of engage them?
Okay, well, sure. So similar to Jamie, we have different audiences that we're targeting. We have people that are in the restaurants themselves at every level of trainer within those locations. So the individual cooks, cashiers, all the way through the training restaurant general managers. So various levels within in the location itself, and then above restaurant leaders. So market leaders or district managers, franchisees themselves, folks who may be in corporate roles. We train individuals within our corporate office all the way through to CEO. So if we're doing, for example, an LTO training, our CEO and everyone else down has to take that training content. And we provide training globally. So as mentioned in the bio, we cover training for all of our international restaurant locations. So a lot of translation and stuff goes into that, of course. But in ways we keep them engaged, it depends. We do have some in-person sessions where we're going to do a lot of activity, a lot of discussion, a lot of them doing the work per se in those types of situations. There are times where we're in the restaurants themselves, doing more maybe hands-on or helping with supporting new restaurant openings and things of that nature. And then there are times where we're doing training virtually, which is, of course, over the last year and a half or so, has been a lot of what we've done. So those workshops online, trying to keep them short, but keeping a lot of activity going in those. And we use a number of different tools in order to do that, from chat boxes. We have different poll tools that individuals will use during them, games that we'll incorporate that they'll use throughout the workshop or throughout the virtual sessions to make sure people don't minds don't wander off, if you will, because of course, as you can imagine, it can be a lot of distractions when you're trying to work on a virtual environment.
I've got lots of follow-up questions, and we're going to get to that. Thank you for that introduction. I'm just curious, you mentioned international. I didn't realize that Churches was international. How international? How many countries are there restaurants?
26 or 27, including the U.S.
Oh, wow. That's great. Well, thank you for that. So Mark, let's go to you. So you just published this book, which we just mentioned, Social by Design. I think the tagline for the book is How to Create and Scale a Collaborative Company. Yeah. So tell us, how does learner engagement fit in within a collaborative company framework?
Yeah, so, obviously, like I said in the beginning, kind of a higher look at the organization is the approach in the book. But something I repeat a lot is that people go to work, right? They don't go to work to learn. They don't go to work to make friends. They don't go to work to be entertained. They go to work. And so we need to start with that particular point. A collaborative environment. I mean, that's a buzzword. We talk about collaboration a lot these days, but at the end of the day, it means, that people are working together. There's a lot of openness and transparency in the organization. So information flows well, and obviously people are connecting and doing so. When you have that level of transparency, when you have that level of input from people, it's a naturally more engaging environment. People are hungry to learn, right? So if we can establish that work environment to be that level of openness, right? We find that people tend to be much more about, I know where I want to go. I'm more hungry to improve in my role in my organization. And therefore you have this larger picture of engagement versus, say, engagement in a module or in a particular training. It's this larger piece of being hungry to gain more experience and insight. Yeah.
Wow, that's great insight there, Mark. I look forward to your contributions and as we have this discussion today. So let's see, Megan, hey, I've known you for several years now. I've long admired the work you've done with many organizations. Have you seen the need for learner engagement change over your 25 years? And if so, how?
Yeah, and that's a really great question, right? And so Mark is broadly looking at a high organizational level, and I look at that kind of learning module level, right? And so on one level, the engagement hasn't changed, right? People have to be paying attention and engaged, right, in order to learn in any kind of efficient way. It's not the only thing, right? So a lot of times we measure engagement and then don't go on to some of the other things, but it's a great, right? You've got to have the engagement. If they're not there and awake and attentive, they won't learn. It's just how human brains work. What I'm finding over the years, though, and as I think about this question, Vince, it's really interesting, right? Society has evolved in the last quarter of a century, right? Learners, consumers, individuals are coming to a forefront in ways that I don't think that organizations have historically come to grips with well. We have over time, and I'm thinking very historically, focused on expert-centered learning, right? So you went to whatever Aristotle was saying, you went and you listened to what Aristotle was saying, right? And not just back then, it's still now. Institutionally centered learning. What does the organization need you to know? Content-centered learning, right? What does an academic institution need you to know? What does an expert need you to know? But now we have consumer culture, and consumer culture is bleeding into this work culture. And all of a sudden, we're really focusing, maybe not all of a sudden, but now we're really focusing on learner engagement and learner-centered approaches as we have tools to be able to do that better.
Yeah. I was thinking that, as every year goes by, that means we have new people entering into the workforce for the first time. And that includes, like, I'm at the age where my children are now, they're young adults and they're entering into the workforce for the first time. And the world now is so much different from when I was their age. And so there's obviously, there's the obvious ways where it's different, but I just think in terms of their mentality, like when I entered the workforce, there wasn't a expectation in my brain that if there was a question that I had, there could be an answer for that question in seconds. That wasn't the way I grew up. I had to go to the library. There's a card catalog there. Maybe the books were limited, but my kids have grown up where their expectation is, hey, if there's a problem or if there's a question, it's just a click away. Now, whether the answer they get is credible or not, that's a whole different, that's maybe a different webinar topic. But I think that what technology has ushered in is new expectations around just access to information, which I think would include access to learning materials. Megan, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was thinking that just now, when I first got into the workplace, I was so excited that the organization I worked for had a plan. Like, literally, it was a learning plan and a career progression plan. And in the first 2 years, I was going to learn these things and I could expect this promotion. And then the 2 years after that, I could learn these things and this promotion. And that was a logical jump over, or I could keep on my path. And it was very top-down driven, right? There's no expectation of like, what can I learn? What can I do here? So it's a very different shift, which may have just been personal.
Yeah. I want to back up for a second and let's just quickly have a discussion around what is learner engagement. I think it's interesting in my mind, a lot of the work I do at Mobile Coach focuses on supporting learners outside of like a formal regimented learning session. So for example, you might have a 1 hour facilitator-led training session, whether that's recorded and e-learning or virtual or in person. And so just by nature, just my own biases, I rarely even think about that piece, where I imagine some of you, that's probably the center of your point of reference when it comes to training. So let's just define a little bit. And so what I mean by that is then when I think about learner engagement, I'm thinking about touch points that the learner is choosing to make, whether it's logging into a system or reading an email or opening a book or whatever it is. Those are all touch points in my mind when I think of learner engagement. Are there other ways to define learner engagement? Anyone like to chime in on that?
I'll jump in. I feel like I come at it from a data and a measurement perspective, right? So what can I measure, which is not necessarily a definition of engagement, right? But who shows up, who participates, how many people participate? As a facilitator, I love to know that people answer questions. And what do they participate in afterwards? I would love to know, like, how else are people defining engagement?
Yeah, when I think about engagement, in not just the term, because we can look at engagement and say somebody is really engrossed in what they're doing. That's great. But in a work environment, we're really looking for people to do better or do different in the place of employment, right? In their roles, in their jobs. So engagement to me is always at that back end where it's like, are they applying, right? Are we seeing this being put into practice, right? So that tells me that engagement has taken place if people are actually absorbing that content and leveraging that content, or in some cases, the conversations they're having or the resources they're particularly using and putting it into effect.
And
Yeah,
that's,
for in my work, very similar to what Mark just mentioned there, with as far as the behavior change that we're going after. But again, it's going to vary based on the type of tool we're using to facilitate the training or type of environment. But we are very tuned in to the data around that, as Megan was alluding to, because it really, we're looking for that afterwards, after the training is over, whatever type of training, even if it was a 5-minute e-learning course, once that's over, what are they doing differently in the restaurants? And did they understand this new tool, this new task, or this procedural change? And so, and then again, that's on a global scale. We do rely a lot on that technology and a lot on what happens afterwards, because just to add in, for a system of around 1,600 restaurants, 27 countries, we have a training team of 4 people who manages that process. So if you could imagine, we are really looking at, so we think about engagement throughout every step, from the design of tools, from the design of training, again, whether that's a workshop in person, whether that's an online workshop, whether that's an e-learning course. And so how can we build in engagement in all of that? And so if you're taking a 5-minute e-learning course, we're targeting that 3 of the 5 minutes, you're doing something. You've got to click something, you've got to answer a question, you've got to drag and drop, something to keep you there in that moment so we can drive for that behavior change.
yeah. So let's, I think that segues nice into this next question that I have, and I'll direct this to you, Felicia, and then Jamie. So both of you mentioned that you have a sort of very diversified target learner audience, whether it's managers to people in the restaurants, or in Jamie's case, you've got writers, and then you've got leaders, and you know, quite a spectrum of people. What makes it difficult to reach these different learners? What are some of the challenges that you face? Felicia, can we start with you?
Oh, sure. For us, it's getting the word out. It's the communication piece. And each of those audiences, we have different ways that it's easiest to reach them. The cooks and cashiers in the restaurant aren't going to check email. The franchisees, it may depend on how frequently are they going to engage with email. Corporate office, you probably can hit them with an email. And then you've got, of course, the international nuances, time differences, et cetera. One thing we recently found very helpful and was we provided all of our restaurants with tablets, and those tablets have a variety of different apps on them. The tablets are cellular enabled. They have phone numbers in them. So we actually can send mobile coach messages to those tablets. We can do screen takeovers to give communication about a training opportunity or engagement or event. And so if there's a workshop or if there's a new course in the LMS, we can send that message directly to them through that device at the restaurant level, and they get it. We also use there's a messaging feature in the LMS. We use that a lot, but we've had to get more creative over the past year, especially to make sure, because we weren't out in the restaurants as much. And so we started using social media. We would share training information started a Facebook page. We do Facebook and Instagram live sessions where individuals can join in. I actually have to join one at 4 o'clock today, but they'll log in and we'll talk about different topics, but we'll also use those as opportunities to share some different updates or training information as well. So we've just had to use a variety of different messages in order to get that word out to them.
That's really interesting. Like the Facebook Live, I mean, what a great use of that social media trend. And what's interesting about that to me is that, you know, you're not, it's a one-to-many broadcast. It's not like formally logging into an LMS and say, okay, I'm going to do this learning. You're making that available because it's frictionless for the people who choose to tune in. I hadn't heard of people using that before, so that's really interesting. Thank you. Jamie, how about you? What makes it, what are some difficult things in reaching your learners?
So because I work in diversity and inclusion, I'm dealing with a real mind shift and cultural shift in the workplace. where many individuals grew up at work saying, we don't talk about these issues at work. We don't talk about race. We don't talk about social issues at work. And so there are many people who are deeply uncomfortable and quiet when entering into these kinds of conversations. And so for me, it's mostly a challenge of just trying to create a safe enough environment where people can feel brave to invite the unspoken. We've been through a big reckoning with race in America, especially over this last year and a half. And I think it's a really new challenge to kind of bring those kinds of topics into work, especially for people who generationally just weren't ready to have that level of discourse. So my challenge is not necessarily in getting people to show up. It's when they're there, are they going to interact and really say what's on their minds and on their hearts? And you have to do kind of a lot of groundwork with ground rules and framework setting and trust building before even getting to that conversation to have it be really meaningful. So that's kind of my biggest challenge, is the sensitive nature of the topics of what we're discussing.
And you bring up, Jamie, that the last year and a half has really been, I think, a pivotal and turning point for some of these topics in this country. I know there's people tuning in from other countries. Has that helped or hurt your ability to try to get people to engage? I'm just curious what your experience has been.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it's helped in the sense that I don't struggle to get people to sign up for my courses. They're maxed out every time. People are hungry for the knowledge. People want to do better in this space. So it's helped in that sense of, I used to kind of knock on doors trying to get people to sign up for these topics. And now it seems like a top priority for every show, for every division that I work in. But it's also kind of hurt because it's bringing up a lot of stuff for people. People are being a lot more open and having these conversations. We didn't really have the skill set before. So it's been a little bit of a growing pain in some situations, but as an organization, it's really been helpful, I think. The conversation has opened up a lot of things that now we're allowed to explicitly talk about at work, and has been really helpful in changing the culture and changing our content.
Felicia, you're also deeply involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion at churches. Do you see a difference in learner engagement around things of topics of that nature versus some of the more functional trainings that you do?
Yeah, we actually are, and for us it's a little different because what we're seeing is people wanting to learn more about others. Because, and of course, as you can imagine, your restaurant is in a particular area, community, or you're really around the people you're around the majority of the time. So what we're starting to see at every level of the business is just a wanting to know and get to know more about other people from every different layer and different aspects. As an example, last night at about 7 o'clock, we had a closing out Pride Month happy hour, and we had individuals from different business functions that logged in, and it was a very informal, just question answer, and just people asking things about their children who may have recently come out and how they've handled things, and questions about how do you support people, and et cetera. And so that's just, a lot of that is driven by our EDI Council. We've put a really big focus on people first, and really understanding that for every restaurant in every country, that the people drive that business. And so wanting to ensure that they are getting the information that they want to receive is a key part of that.
Yeah, thank you. When we did our poll at the beginning of the webinar, 50% of the poll of the attendees wanted to have us address how to integrate learning into the flow of work. Mark, I think I'll ask this question to you. How do you integrate learning into the flow of work?
Yeah, obviously, there's a lot of different techniques and technologies out there, but I think anybody, and I saw in the poll early on that there was a lot of people at that director level within attending today. And I think for me, it's always been, in my own experience and the work I've done, it's always been really, really critical to understand how people work. What is their work environment like? What what is their workflow? What are the technologies that they're currently using? Because anything we do outside of that with trying to integrate learning, if you're talking about pushing learning in, adds a lot of friction to the workflow. And if you go back to my statement before, people go to work, they want to get better at what they do. We have to work within those systems. So the first step in that process, in my estimation, is to be able to understand and really study carefully what it is they do in the flow of work, so you can work within that, in those boundaries.
Yeah. I think probably piggybacking on that, that probably, changes depending on the type of learner. And we've already talked about, the different types of learners. For me, it's an easy model to think about segmenting learners. It's a little unfair because, but just in terms of overgeneralization, let's say that we're segmenting learners. Maybe there's power learners or lukewarm learners or disengaged learners, however you want to bucket people. Megan, can I ask you, what do you segment learners? What type of segmentation of learners might be helpful, if any? And then how would that, how would sort of this helping those segments in the flow of work relate to sort of touching them as or helping to engage them during their flow of work?
Yeah, and we create learner personas, and use that to help us focus on their needs, right? To exactly what Felicia was saying a minute ago, but also what Mark was saying, right? Based on that segmentation, what and the nature of the work that you're doing, the nature of the topic that you're engaging with, how are you going to come at this? And so the segmentation is, I think, in addition, and there's lots of different dimensions we can do this, right? So yeah, power learners, lukewarm learners, disengaged. There are other, like, are we talking about novice learners or communities of experts, or experienced learners who are like they're at that learning edge, they've got some things down, or and they need to work on other things. We were talking about early career, right? Young adults have faced different environments at the workport than we have a few pre-retirement learner personas, right there. And so there's lots of different contexts, and I think that's really, and it's to borrow from design thinking and user experience design, where we're looking at what is the context, and that's what drives our learner segmentation.
That's a lot of ways to slice and dice variables to parameters to group people in, but that's really useful. I want to spend a few minutes, and before I ask this next question, if anyone has specific questions for any of the panelists, please put them in the chat, or use the Q&A feature. We would love to get some of your questions, make sure we cover some of the things you're wondering about as you join the webinar today. But I kind of want to back up even more, and let's just sort of talk nuts and bolts. What are some solutions that work for learner engagement? And have any of you had solutions that maybe you tried that didn't work? So Mark, can I start with you, and then we'll ask Jamie to weigh in on this as well.
Yeah, for me, I always look and I see the most successful learning solutions met what Charles Jennings referred to as the four aspects or elements of real learning, right? And that is involves experience, practice, conversation, and reflection. And I think in L&D, a lot of the efforts within L&D around training, they do the first two really well. We definitely see a lot of experiential simulations and the like, to create those. We also see a lot of practice opportunities built right in. But where we fall off is often in that space we need for conversation and reflection, to really internalize and process and have peers to talk about. One of the things I mentioned in the chat, and I was pointing at Jamie actually, because when Jamie was talking about how people were driven to go to her sessions that were there, and that she wasn't having to knock on doors, I was wondering about the social proof aspect. How open are we in sharing what we're learning in the organization, so others want to gain from that experience as well and find their way to it. So for me, it's having those four elements met is when you really achieve that kind of golden calf of a solution that works.
It feels like that, to me, that makes intuitive sense why conversation and reflection would be more elusive. I think that really requires a culture that supports that, sort of expectations that support, permission to have conversations and reflection. And that really does feel like a challenge, but that companies who can make a safe place, we've talked about safety in the past in this webinar, boy, I think they would have a huge leg up in helping people really apply and utilize whatever training they're participating in to benefit themselves and the whole organization.
Yeah, and I would just add, Vince, I think too, it's important in what I shared there that, L&D has a real responsibility to kind of follow up again with the workforce to see how have you implemented what you've learned? How, what tips can you give back to us to see how we can improve the training that was provided? And just keeping that open door of conversation between the two improves both.
Yeah, thanks. Jamie, how about you? What solutions have you tried that's worked, and maybe what solutions haven't worked as well?
I really love what Mark just said about conversation and reflection being so important, because those are actually the pieces that we've really been building our workshops around lately, is a lot of time for reflection and conversation. Practically, for those of you who are doing Zoom-based learnings, they have this awesome feature around breakout groups, and we spend at least half of our time together putting people into breakout groups. We'll ask them a reflection activity like, think about your leadership opportunity. What do you hope that those working for you, how do you hope to make them feel? What do you hope they say about you? How do you want your show culture to be on this show? And then they'll go off with their peers into breakout groups and just talk for 5 to 7 minutes. Or reflection exercise, similarly, that's been really causing great conversation, is just think about a time when you could have shown up as an ally, but you failed in the workplace. What was that like, and what would you do differently this time? And then they go off into a breakout room and discuss. Those kinds of conversations where they're thinking about either their future state or a past state and what they want to do differently, and just learning from each other's real workplace experiences has been awesome. And our breakout groups have been getting such high scores on survey results. They constantly want to do more and more of them. So we're trying to limit lecture and the right answers that we're trying to teach them around behavior change to as short as possible, and allowing them to really learn from each other. I also really appreciate, just around other tools that have been working. Zoom also has this annotation tool for those of you who haven't tried that yet. It's under view and then options and then annotate, and people can do stamps and they can draw on your screen. So I like to really keep learners engaged and interested by doing interactive activities like that, where they'll put an annotation stamp on something. And people tend to really like that feature. Just teaching you a few Zoom tips if you're interested. And along what's not working, it's really traditional, academic models. I think we get so into, people who've been in the learning space, there's so many models of things that we want to show people, and it may be interesting to us. It's not interesting, and it doesn't stick out to most of my learners. Most people are like, I didn't get anything out of that, but can I go into a breakout group again? It's just, I try to drop anything kind of really academic, especially depending on my audience, especially if it's not a very corporate population, and really try not to use PowerPoint decks and just kind of have fun together, and tell personal stories. Allowing people to tell stories, that's really kind of what they walk away with, whether that's really positive or negative. Sometimes our stories around exclusion really stick out to people, and now leaders know, hey, I probably do that too. I probably look at my phone or check emails when my people are talking to me, and that made that person emotional, so now I won't do that. Those are wins.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of storytelling as well. There's I do a fair amount of public speaking, and I've learned through coaches and other wonderful mentors and examples that people are going to forget what you say, but they won't forget how they feel, especially if you make them feel something meaningful and profound. And I think that's true for training courses as well. And I think it's interesting, Jamie, how you mentioned breakout rooms and annotation. There were plenty of video conferencing tools before Zoom. And then the pandemic hit, and Zoom really took off, even though they had very similar features as these other collaboration sort of video conferencing tools, but just these little features that they were able to come up with, I think, were really wonderful emerging tech. It sort of helped people really embrace them. And now, I think all of us wish we would have bought stock in Zoom, 18 months ago. But speaking of technologies and features like that, and I really think it's interesting that you highlighted those things, Jamie. Felicia, let me ask you, what do you see in terms of emerging technologies or trends that you see that are coming up to help with learner engagement?
So in our environment, the social media aspect is really starting to be a big piece. I mean, we have been, again, driven a lot by necessity over the past year and a half. We've got our managers and restaurants and team members in restaurants that log into we use Microsoft Teams versus Zoom a lot, but they're logging into Microsoft Teams sessions and calls, and during the instead of maybe an annotation, we may ask a question and tell them to answer with a GIF. And because it's built in, they can quickly search a GIF and give their answer. So everyone's kind of seeing all these different GIFs that come into the chat based on people's answers. And then the other technologies that we've used to really dual stream the social media sessions, so those live sessions, we have some people who are Facebookers, and then we have people that they're more Instagram. So we found a technology that allows us to dual stream the session on both platforms at the same time. So if you're an Instagram person, your notification comes up and we're live on your Instagram. Someone else is you're on Facebook, and being able to use those types of tools as well. And then we've also started bringing in some augmented reality type tools. We launched the Sandwich last year, and we sent a sticker with a QR code to all the restaurants in addition to other training materials, just to give some more variety. And since they had these tablets with cameras on them, they held the camera over the sticker. You would see kind of in this augmented reality, the hands appear and the sandwich is being built in front of you. But the background is wherever you're standing, so if you're at the cutting board at the sandwich station, that's happening at your cutting board. So just doing different things like that to really keep that variety there. Some things although they may not have worked at first, like for example, Microsoft Teams, but when we went back and we did a bit short, okay, let's do some quick Teams training, and sent out little one-pagers on tips for how to use these tools. Then when we went back to it, we found people a lot more engaged and a lot more comfortable with the technology.
On the augmented reality, I'm waiting for the day where they'll add an odor emitter so you can actually then smell the sandwich you're making. That would be awesome. Megan, you and your firm do a lot of learning technology work. Do you see some emerging technologies that you'd like to mention coming in regards to learner engagement?
I think, we see lots of tools and lots of cool things all the time. And I think the trick, though, is what Felicia has been saying and what Mark has been talking about, is reducing friction, right? Reducing the friction to get to it. So if I need to, in order to engage with augmented reality, download another app, well, there's friction, right? But if a QR code, we've all got the app already. So we just go grab, right? So how do we reduce friction? And then to explore all those spaces of friction, right? So one is friction for the learner. Is it time? So we're providing great tools. We are feeding them well, right? That's how we used to get people to come to training. We gave them candy, right? I've done it. The best, right? Better instructor competition around who's got the best chocolates. I win that one usually. But the other thing that I'm really becoming aware of, and I've long been a focus on, and this is about to be a little bit heretical here, I've long been focused on the user experience, and have often said, don't worry about the administrators, don't worry about the content creators, don't worry, we'll suck it up and deal. The trick is, right, and Felicia's story gets to this, when we make content creation and generation and dissemination very, very friction-free, when I can snap a picture or click a button and suddenly be live on Facebook with everybody in the company or everybody who's logged in at that point, I now have reduced the amount of friction for the L&D team. And we have to manage that carefully, right? So if we take away all the friction, then next thing you know, we're bombarding people with learning and then they're not working, right, Mark? So I get that, but I'm also seeing a lot of space around how do I make it easy to deploy content across multiple tools very, very quickly so I can react to what the organization needs.
It seems that's what a key business problem that maybe encapsulates this whole learner engagement topic, where we've talked about the different segments of learners, the different types of, the different contexts that learners might find themselves in. I thought Jamie's comment about there's certain segments where she won't even think about bringing a PowerPoint or having some lecture-based learning style. That's, I think, finding ways to meet people where they are, so that they can not only, very easily just get the gist of why this is important and why it matters to them. That feels like a nice way to sum up the challenge of learner engagement. I'm just watching the clock, and I want to give people a chance to ask questions if they have any. I've been kind of keeping an eye on the chat, but Corey, if I've missed any questions that people have had, please let me know. But just give everybody a sense or a chance to ask questions. And while I give you a chance to either write a question or use the Q&A, again, I'd like to give everyone a big shout out and thanks for participating today. We're going to hang out till the end of the hour, about 7 minutes. And everyone, of course, will get a link to the recording of this discussion afterwards. And let me also, before anyone leaves, I just want to share my screen. And in turn, when speaking of learner engagement, one thing that we put together for anyone that's interested, we've put together a post-webinar chatbot. So if you're thinking about different solutions and different ways on how you might be able to reach people in the flow of work, consider a chatbot could be a potential solution. If you want to try this out, if you're in the United States, you can use that SMS. Just type a new SMS message, just as if you're messaging someone new that you've met, that 224 number, and just say hi. I'm going to ask Corey to put in the link to the Slack and Teams version of this chatbot. Totally optional for you to try out, just to see, hey, is this something that can engage you during the flow of work? And this chatbot's going to summarize some of the things that we've talked about today over the next few weeks. And so give that a try if you'd like. With that, questions. Looks like there's a question from Katie to Felicia. I'll read it, even though I think you all might have it up. Felicia, I think you mentioned using tables in the stores, maybe tablets. I'm wondering whether or not you use mobile phone enabled training that the employees do on their personal devices. Felicia, can you answer that question?
Sure. So all of the different apps that are in those tablets that we sent to other restaurants, individuals do have the option of downloading those apps to their phone. So for example, our learning management system is an app. We've got different routines. We've got, as I mentioned, things with QR codes, a lot of different ways people are engaging with us through different training. And so, but because of the fact that it's a personal device, and we again, thinking about the broad spectrum of people we're training, folks in the corporate office, hourly cooks and cashiers, we do have to be cautious about quote unquote making something only available through a personal device or requiring that, because we don't pay for their cellular service. So what we did was, going back to what Megan was saying as far as reducing that friction, sending the tablets to the restaurants that everyone in the restaurant can use. They're geo-fenced. If it walks away, it's just now, I guess you could just make it a tile for your kitchen or something, because it's nothing, you're not gonna be able to use it. But they have now they have the access to those different apps, or we can communicate again with those tablets. We can do, we've used those to do dial-in virtual inspections in the restaurants. And so they're FaceTiming, or they're using Teams to do a video conference. So all of those different same access without having to use that personal device, we're able to do through this tablet. And those tablets are in our international restaurants. So we're able to communicate directly with those restaurants as well through that device. And it just eliminates that, that sticking point of, oh, this is on my personal phone. Now it's on the tablet. But again, they do have the option of getting access to those same tools through their phone.
So it sounds like that if they want to, on their own volition, they could say, hey, is this app available on my phone? I'd rather have it there. You don't prevent them from doing that.
Oh, absolutely. And then some of the apps are geo-fenced. So because for, again, hourly employees, you don't want you don't want them in the LMS doing training at home because you need to pay them for that. So once they leave the restaurant, even if it's on their personal device, and once they're about a mile outside of the radius of the restaurant, they can't use to access the site.
That's interesting. Thank you. Hopefully,
I'd
Kate
like to
can
add
answer
to
the
that, if I can, and do a quick plug. While we're talking about using mobile phones for training, we actually do use Mobile Coach, and our employees have really been liking it. After we do a session on maybe leading inclusively, I'll give them a phone number that they can text, and then we text them once or twice a week for maybe 2 or 3 months, and it just helps follow up the learning. I'll send something on a Friday like, hey, remember in class when we talked about setting a coffee chat with somebody you don't know? Well, why don't you schedule that today? And then people will get a little reminder. So it's kind of nice to follow up with text messages, and it helps foster that behavior change over the next few months. So I really like the tool, and I think it's great as a follow-up learning resource.
Thank you, Jamie. And Jamie, do you have the same sensitivity with Disney television employees around personal devices and sensitivity about having them use works-related stuff on their phones?
A little, but they opt in to the phone number, so it's okay, and they can hit stop at any time. And it's a very short engagement. It's maybe 8 weeks or 12 weeks, then we're done. So we do have that concern, but it's also okay if they use their personal device.
Great. Any other questions that, Corey, were there any questions that we've missed?
Nope, we've covered it.
Well, and I think we're just at time. So Jamie and Felicia, Megan and Mark, thank you so much. Thought this was, I learned a lot. I thought this was a really useful, interesting conversation. So thank you all. And thanks for all of you who participated today. We, again, are grateful for your attendance today. So I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day. And for those of you in the United States, a wonderful 3-day weekend coming up. And we'll all see you later. Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.